States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order item of business is the approval of the minutes. I need to make one quick announcement. For those of you who have not been here before for the state board meetings, we have a sign-up sheet for public comment. We're going to keep it open for 5 more minutes if you would like to sign up to make a public comment. So just wanted to make that announcement. First item of business is to approve the minutes from the last board. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. I have a motion and a second. Any revisions, comments? Hearing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? I am going to go right into the action, use my statement as part of the action so that we don't kind of prolong this, because my statements will be focused on the approval of the final A through F grades for schools. So I'm going to use a PowerPoint, also just kind of make some comments. I first want to thank everyone for your interest in this, your patience. This is a very good day for Indiana schools. This is a very positive day, overall very positive news, and we're very excited about this. Kind of give you a brief history. We, for many years, have been kind of beholden to 2 different school accountability systems. Public Law 221, No Child Left Behind. In a number of years, we would make 2 different announcements on 2 different dates. One, what was our PL 221 categorical placement, and then later on, how many schools made it adequate yearly progress, or AYP. We began to converge those so that we were trying to make one announcement, but yet there were still 2 designations. No Child Left Behind was based, as was Public Law 221, was based on very simply a comparison of the percentage of students meeting proficiency. It did not adequately close our achievement gaps. We've had that discussion at this table many times, that our achievement gaps were really never addressed using those measurements, because really what you could focus on were those kids right along the margin, what we referred to, Mike and I had this conversation, the bubble kids. So what we went about doing was trying to solve a number of problems. One, how do you converge these 2 accountability systems? And the waiver that the United States Department of Education, that opportunity that they issued us, we announced very quickly we were going to take advantage of that. To converge our 2 accountability systems into one, to come up with measurements that we believe would better address achievement gaps, and that would result in clear and understandable, simple designations for schools, A, B, C, D, F. So we wouldn't have exemplary, commendable, academic progress, academic watch, probation, and then did we make AYP or not? We would have very simply an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F, and that would be your accountability metric and your accountability designation for both accountability systems. The process was 2 years in the making almost. We have developed a growth model as part of this. We have looked at all new measurements for both elementary and middle and high schools. And we have had many people at the table to talk about this. So we are here today under these new measurements, which by a long shot, we believe are much better than the old measurements. Okay, there's very little doubt in our mind. If we just look at closing the achievement gaps, our statistical modeling shows us that we will expedite that in some instances as much as 4 times. So we believe that these measurements are far better than the old No Child Left Behind 221 measurements. We believe they give us that comprehensive view. Make no mistake, there is some complexity to this. I actually had someone share with me the other day that in many instances it's kind of like a safety rating for a car. You understand the rating, but you don't really understand all the things that go into the rating all the time. But you want to be sure the car is safe, and you want to be able to understand that. And so that's what we've tried to do. There has been some discussion about delays. We acknowledge that after we sent out preliminary grades, we did delay to today. Reason for that is simple. We wanted to get this right. These are new data sets. These are new data points that schools have had to drill into, that our staff has had to drill into, and that we've worked very closely with schools to make sure that their designations are correct. So it has taken us a while to work through the appeals. Let me give you some statistical perspective. This year, we had 140 appeals that were brought to the department. In comparison, we had 83 last year, and we had 138 in 2010. This year, as we drilled into this data and as schools drilled into this data, 42% of those appeals were at least partially approved. Now, let me explain what I mean by partially approved. Schools have become so accustomed and really so focused on their data that they drilled into data that may not affect their letter grade. They just wanted to be certain that the right data was for the right students and that they understood which students are getting growth, which students should be counted, those types of things. And that's a very positive thing. I had a former superintendent said that this process has forced schools to know their data like never before. That everyone must know their data like never before. Of that 42%, 11% changed a grade. So, again, our premium over the last number of weeks was to get the data correct, work with schools to make sure their data reporting was correct, and make sure that our data warehousing had the correct information. I also want to take a historical look at when we've done categorical placements and designations in the past. In 2009, we did this in April because of the double testing, the two assessments. In 2010, the grades were released, the designations were released on November 23rd of 2010. And in 2011, we did it in August to accommodate school turnaround because we needed to expedite the process in order to make intervention decisions. So here we are today on October 31st. I want to go through some of the data. I said this was good news for schools, and I just want to show you what good news looks like. Here is our 2012 grade distribution. At the sake of reading this, statewide, almost 41% of our schools are A's. Just a tick over 20% are B's. Again, just over 20% are C's. 11.5% D's. 7.1% F's. So 81% of our schools are in the top three categories, A's, B's, C's. 81%. I spent a little time last night with looking at data from two other states who recently moved to a very similar model. Not necessarily the same calculation, so I want to be very fair about that, but moving to new calculations under the NCLB waiver process and using A through F designations. Last week, Louisiana announced their percentage of A's and B's were 36%, and that was at an all-time high. Earlier this week, Oklahoma released their A through F designations, and they too showed an all-time high of 57% A's and B's. So if we want to look at the historic distribution, we see that from 2010, 2011, 2012, our grade distributions are really not that out of sync. I wouldn't say even not that out of sync. I would say not out of sync. So that is a bit of a historical perspective. There has been a tremendous amount of discussion from when we started discussion with the growth model to when we started this discussion about school accountability, that we were operating under a normal bell-shaped curve. If you lay our grade distribution on top of a bell-shaped curve, you see no resemblance.
So we're not forcing the data. We're not forcing that.
We are not forcing any distribution here. As a matter of fact, it's perfectly reasonable to believe we can get all our schools to a certain level. So there is no normal distribution here. As a matter of fact, overall, it's very safe to say that the effect of growth had a positive impact on school grades. In speaking to people who are much more accomplished in statistics than I am, I had someone say to me in its basic form, if you were truly following a normal distribution for the growth model, growth would have no effect on school grades because of a forced normal distribution. And that's not the case here. Overall, growth had a positive impact on elementary, middle school grades. I saw where Steve Baker is going to make a comment later, but I'm going to steal a little bit of Steve's thunder because I think the beauty of this is really found in the comment Steve gave me. And I want to really focus on starting at the second sentence. Our teachers, parents, and students are more focused on driving improvement and achievement than ever before. But I think the most important thing, and I want to say this in respect to Steve's last statement, the last sentence of Steve's statement. Many people who would say, well, wait a minute, that seems a little top-heavy, that 61% of our schools are A's and B's. And in my conversation with Steve said, let's just be sure that we focus and get the D and F schools up. That if we're really focused on doing that, and we're really focused on giving good information to schools on how to move from B to A, from C to B, and move from DF up the scale, that is the beauty of this model. And that's what we're attempting to do. So, again, I believe that what we're seeing here is teachers, schools, school leaders answering to accountability, looking at this information, utilizing it to drive school performance. And I think that's very positive. I had a meeting with some folks and they said, you know, how would you, if you were still a district superintendent, give the elevator pitch on how to calculate school grades? And I believe that you really can drill the elementary middle model into 3 or 4 basic components. One's performance and improvement. We still have that backbone that says how many kids, what percentage of students are we getting over the bar? And we had the discussion at this table many times about how important that is. Then you factor in growth. What percentage of your students are making growth? And the third component is how well you're closing the achievement gaps. That's that lowest 25% compared to the upper 75%, what we refer to sometimes as a super subgroup. There is a bullet point that is very important that affects this, and you see that last bullet point called participation. And that is still a federal requirement. We must have a check in this system to make sure that schools test the right percentage of students. Okay, so participation is a piece of this. So again, if I were sitting at a school board meeting this evening, I would say these grades are based this way. It's basically our performance, how much we improve our overall performance, how well all of our students grow, and how good a job we are doing in closing achievement gaps. If you move to the high school model, is again performance and improvement based on ECAs, graduation rates, and college and career readiness indicators, which we have identified as advanced placement, international baccalaureate, dual credit, or industry certification in career and technical education. And I think in a nutshell that, now, again, I go back to my comment about the car safety rating. It is much more complicated than that. There's no question. But this is a very general overview of how school performance is assessed. Now, what we will be seeing once these grades are approved is we will be seeing these report cards. These report cards, the data that regarding school grades will actually be released upon approval. They will be up on the website. The report cards will be up in about 2 weeks because once we load the data, then it prints a report card. So that report card will be actually available in a couple weeks. Now, just to recap, we did 2 views of the report card. Okay? We did a view that was bullet pointed, kind of a narrative view. You see the high school, middle school, and then we did another view that was had a lot more graphical information on it. Again, you can click into each one of these and go deeper and deeper and deeper to see how the calculations were performed. And at our State of Education address, we spoke of Dickinson Fine Arts Academy. So schools we will be delivering, schools, these banners. So again, I am excited. I think we definitely are moving in the right direction with accountability. I think if we weren't, we wouldn't see this statistic. And I'll close and ask Dale and Will Krebs to come to the table to answer any board questions. But we have one school on year 5. One school this year. And if we look at how well we've moved schools through the accountability system, and again, Jim Larson's team has done a phenomenal job providing supports to schools as they are moving through this system so that we don't have to intervene, we don't have to make those tough decisions like we made last August. That's our goal. So with that, I'll ask Dale and Will to come forward and answer any questions the board may have. Also, I want to take this opportunity to welcome Will to this role. Those of you who were used to seeing John Gabera, I think it was the Dale, the Saturday of the London Olympics, I got a call from John while he and his wife were in the London Olympics informing me that he was moving on to College Board. So Will has stepped in, and we have gotten nothing but positive comments from the field about Will, about his team's responsiveness. I would also thank our staff, Ann Davis, Nicole Norville. Everyone has stepped up on this lift. I think this has been a huge lift, but again, I'll open it up. Welcome Will to this role, and open it up for questions.
Thank you for all the work you've done. I'll have to say the elevator pitch was extremely helpful for me because I continue to get a lot of questions about the formula. As a side note, I wouldn't print the F banners. I mean, I'm not so sure the schools will put them up, but just as a save the money on that. The questions I have is around performance, and I think that I wanted to clarify that down the road, this board has expressed willingness to maybe consider other variables besides just the I-STEP, and that seems to be the biggest piece I hear the most negative about is, you know, are you going to be open to NWEA or Scantron or other things that we're using to measure? And I just wanted to kind of affirm that as we move forward, because, you know, this is a growing process. It's a journey, and I wanted to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. Joe, I can answer that. First, I don't think there's any question, and I think I said this a couple meetings ago, and I just want to affirm this again. When we started, and I'm going to pick on Steve a little bit because Steve was part of the secondary team that put together the high school measurements. And one of the pieces of frankly, discomfort I had when Steve and that group came to me and said, this is what we came up with, I said, my gosh, this is so complicated. This seems to be complex. And I thought what we would see were the elementary middle folks really liking theirs because it was fewer, it seemed to be fewer calculations. And what we now know is that the elementary middle community would like to see more factors like the high school, and they have been very assertive in their position that they would probably substitute a little bit more complexity for more factors. So the answer to that is I think you're going to be seeing in short order us coming with some potential tweaks to that.
Good. Thank you.
That's the same question my superintendent had. He said that he said I would prefer to see the elementary middle look more like the high school, and he said I understand why they tried to simplify it. He goes, but again, thank you for what you
The answer to
guys-
that's yes.
Dr. Mann?
Yes.
Can you go back to the elevator speech on elementary and middle? Well, you could to high school too, but one of the issues you brought up as part of the elevator speech that I want to try to incorporate some way is when we have groups that have traditionally fell behind and we could maybe ignore that, you know, and this system. In the elevator speech, that comes up in growth and performance, I suspect. Certainly participation. But somewhere I think that's a big part of the story. You can't leave, in a democracy or a society like, you can't conveniently leave groups behind and say, well, that's just kind of how they do, you know, and that's just not acceptable anymore.
I'm going to ask Carrie to respond to this because she said something before the meeting started that I think is incredibly powerful.
I've met with lots of principals and teachers and different superintendents talking about it, and in one of the last meetings that I had, one of the principals said, so it's no longer good enough just to get these kids over the bar. We now have to get these kids to grow too. And I said, you just sold the model. You know, every child in Indiana deserves to get their needs met. Every child, regardless of where they're at on the spectrum, deserves to be challenged and deserves to grow. And if you don't understand all of this, you can at least understand that every child deserves to be challenged and to be
That's our
pushed.
imperative, and that's what I probably like most after all the work's done. And it's uncomfortable, it's hard work, but we just have to do that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, the two, I do have a question, but a couple of comments briefly, too. I do agree. I think the inclusion of growth and the recognition that that schools can be acknowledged and rewarded or penalized for not achieving growth, I think is significant. Because and the other thing I'll just remind everyone, and I don't mean to sound harsh, but I continue to assert that some of the things we're measuring are floors, not ceilings. The I-STEP is not fundamentally a hard test. It's not, it's a minimum. It's not a maximum.
You won't get us to world-class standards.
For the kind of preparation that my colleague Jim always reminds us is just so essential to the world of work of today and tomorrow. So, so just to kind of orient us and just remind us that we still have work to do. This is a much clearer way, to my mind, of helping schools and districts understand how they're doing and where they have to go. The question I have, Dale, would it be possible to provide, I did a quick sort yesterday by grade, and there are some school districts, it seems, that have a significant number of failing schools, and I wonder if it would be possible to provide information to the board on the kind of percentages, because obviously these districts are very different in terms of the total number of schools, so it's not fair to just judge them on the actual number of schools, but it would be useful to have a percentage. So I think it's important that we also take up the question of what's happening in a few of these districts that seems to suggest problems that are not just specific, but are systemic in a certain way to some of these districts. And I'd like to be able to, at a future meeting, to focus on that and talk about that a little more. On the other hand, we should also celebrate districts that have, very significant percentages of A's as well. So if you could provide that information at some point, I think that would be useful for the board. And obviously, we can do it ourselves, but with a spreadsheet, but that would be helpful.
Let me also say that a piece of this that I neglected to talk about is one of the overwhelming requests I had from day one was to get out of what we refer to inside this department as AYP caps. And AYP caps mean that you could only get a C if your subgroups didn't hit certain levels. We had a number of what have been traditionally high-performing schools that were capped at C because of that federal requirement. In this waiver, we are now able to prove that those are A schools. So there is a swing of schools up from C to A because they are no longer capped at a C level. And that's another product of this model.
I just had a short question. I didn't know if you're finished. So I can be clear on this. We've done a lot of work, but our goal is to collapse PL 221, AYP, and theoretically NCLB, which all into a bundle of growth.
Actually, what we did with the waiver was do just that. Our waiver enabled us to, if you will, pull together No Child Left Behind, which it's did you make AYP or not, with Public Law 221, and make the placements understandable. And that's what this does. So there will not be an announcement this year, did schools make AYP? Okay, this is the announcement. You're an A, B, C, D, or F, and that is your announcement. So what happened in our waiver, Joe, is the U.S. Department of Education approved this so that we don't have those two announcements anymore.
Just a couple of things. First of all, Tony, and I think our getting rid of the AYP is a celebration, and I appreciate the work that we did that. And last year when we had that discussion, we said that had to happen, and so I appreciate that. It's interesting. I've been as Carrie and I as I talk, I started talking to a group of younger principals, and I started talking about Dean Evans and Governor Moore and the A+ program, and they wanted to know who those people were. And so I said, okay. But you know, the one thing, and maybe I'm not finding it on here, but when we approve these, are we also approving incorporation grades?
No, the corporation grades are not in this calculation. The
Okay.
reason was, and thank you for asking that. The reason is we wanted to focus this discussion at the school level because our state accountability model is school specific. And we wanted to also focus all of our time regarding appeals on the school specific data. So the answer to that is no.
Okay, and I appreciate that because I think some folks are searching for those.
Sure.
And things. And I appreciate the idea of the graph on the. When I first started teaching, one of my principals came in and said I gave too many A's and B's. And the reality is, as a teacher, I was working real hard that all the kids were getting to the point of meeting the fundamentals of the lesson I was teaching. So you know what? On a scale of 90, 80, or whatever I was using, they were all A's and B's. Why would I not give that kid an A or B if he had reached the expectation that I'd set? Maybe my expectations weren't high enough, but so I appreciate that we moved away from a bell curve. A few years ago, and I used my Larry Lazat guy. You know, we came out with the saying that all children can learn, and historically, a lot of people said that's not true. Either the kids from the trailer parks can't learn because of where they come from, or they can't learn because of a handicap, or et cetera. But we really had a belief that all kids can't learn, and then we jumped that hurdle, and now we're at the hurdle of all children can learn at a high level. And the same people bucking that other situation are bucking that a little bit. So I appreciate the idea that we are working, instead of a bell curve, we're working for an S curve. And I appreciate that. The questions that I have that I would like to address, and I think that is fair to address, is I like the idea of growth. And the concerns that have been given to me is this. We take a cadre, a group, and we take an average of how much those people have grown. And that's how we determine what high growth, low growth is. But if you want to go backwards, that kind of says we're always going to have people in low growth. And that's a little bit of a return to a bell curve. You see what I'm talking about? And so what I'm saying is, we need to set a standard of saying what's high growth before we start the test.
Sure.
Because if we're going to give points and move kids up and down on the grading scale because of high growth, low growth, we can't determine low growth after we've given the test. There has to be a standard of what is high growth, what is normal growth, before we start that test. But see, because if we're doing a cadre and we're measuring growth on the groups, then we're always going to have a group in low growth. And we're always going to penalize people because of low growth. And so how do we get away from that?
Well, let me address that because I'm going to let Will and Dale talk about the kind of the weeds of this, but I'm going to talk about it at a high level. And Mike, one of the things we did, and I'm going to give someone a lot of credit for this, because when we first started this discussion of the growth model, Tony Lux continuously challenged me on your very question. And he said, why not build targets into the growth model? And the best way I can illustrate this is by giving this intuitive argument. And the intuitive argument is this. If you have a student who is pass at grade 5, was right on the pass line at grade 5, and they were right on the pass line at grade 6, intuitively, didn't that student get a year of growth? And the answer to that's yes. That makes sense. And we then went about setting those targets. So what will come from today, and again, I'm going to let Will and Dale talk about this, are those targets. Because in practice, in our model, it is feasible for 100% of your students to get growth or high growth. Because we didn't force that distribution post-assessment, we actually set the targets prior to the assessment. So, Dale, you want to talk a little bit about that? But I also want to just give you this, because, Mike, you talked about all students can learn at a high level. Of the schools that gained 3 or 4 letter grades this year, 84% were high poverty schools. I want you to think about that.
Say that again.
Of the schools that improved their letter grades, 3 or 4 letter grades, 84% of those were high poverty schools. Talk about the growth piece for Mike, please.
So what you described is absolutely on point. We refer to this as growth to target. And what we're able to do is look at any individual student and compare it to his or her current academic peer group and that same academic peer group that has walked the same academic path. We're able to understand where that student is likely to score in the upcoming year. So we're able to look at that historical data and say all these other students who have shared the same academic demographics of this student, the same set of test scores, have scored within what we call a fan, a certain range. And within that range, we're able to set the lines between high growth, typical growth, and low growth. We freeze that fan at the beginning of the year, and we don't change it after the student is assessed. So we're able to say, based on this student's current academic peer group and past scores, right now at the beginning of the year, if the student scores above a 500, that will be high growth. Then after all those students are assessed, we don't re-norm that fan. We leave it alone and are able to say the student did indeed hit a 500, therefore is high growth. And that allows, as Dr. Bennett said, any student and every student in Indiana could hit above that line and receive high growth.
I think you answered Mike's question with yes, I agree with him, but I'm not sure the schools will know that unless you affirmatively indicate it before this year's testing. I think you just said the targets are there.
Yes, and we use the targets to calculate the 11-12 grades.
So you really aren't shoving a bell curve. Irrespective, because once you set a target, you could shove that curve up there.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, if you visually, you can just see how you can do it.
Dave's point's well taken. We need to make
Yes.
sure that we inform schools what the targets are.
Yep.
Yeah, good.
I was going to make one other point about the elevator speech, and all this discussion has teed it up. By the way, in general, a new system like this is going to take constant communication, and there'll be tweaks and improvements. The other part of the elevator speech I wanted to get back to was the disparate groups and make sure everybody gets to move. Some folks want to know in the elevator speech, how about a privileged environment? Privileged school, privileged demographics, they get an A. And Neil, you kind of teed this up, that what does that mean? Does that mean against international competition you're an A? Does that mean, where is it? So some people ask me, what motivates in this system? I have my version answer. I'm going to have the expert answer here in a minute. What motivates folks, these last little numbers you gave about folks that were in D and F and make these big spurts, they obviously had a team of educators and parents got together and said, we're going to do something different here. Because that didn't happen by accident. That's a lot of hard work, innovation. What gets a group of parents and educators and principals together when you're in A school? Because some people believe once you're in A school, because you live in La La Land or wherever, that you're always going to be in A school. And the elevator speech, I don't think addresses that it's continuous improvement for the best.
Dan, I think this is the piece that's so very important right here. At the elementary middle level, and then I'll talk about at the high school level, it's that issue of growth. It really is that issue of growth. We do have schools that have 90% pass rates whose kids didn't grow.
In other words, they kind of said, well, we're good.
I think we had Eric Ban in here a couple years ago, and Eric made a comment that has stuck with me. He made a comment that one of his concerns was the school he was serving, and if you'll remember, he was with Crown Point, and he was talking about really pushing his kids academically at Crown Point, and he said the big issue he had to make sure he didn't do was he wanted to make sure his district didn't quote unquote hide behind their demographics.
Yes, that's what people ask.
And I believe that's the discussion we're beginning to have. Is, I will still go back when Mike talked or Joe talked about other factors. I think, and I know we had this
PISA scores.
Well, we had this philosophical discussion when we talked about building this model. The philosophical discussion was, should we carve out and look how our upper 25% are doing?
Absolutely.
Are we pushing those kids? And I think that is a conversation we should have.
We should have it.
And I think that goes to your point. But let me also, we were talking about these disadvantaged of the 18 districts where every school in the district received an A. Using the Title I definition of high poverty, 8 of the 18 were high poverty.
That's incredible.
So again, I believe this, when I started by saying this is good news, I think this is good news for Indiana schools.
I'd like to address the point you raised also, Dan. And I think what continues to incentivize the good school districts is wanting their students to have jobs when they graduate, wanting them to have college credits when they graduate. And a perfect example up in my area is Munster High School. I had the opportunity to sit in on their board meeting this past month. And it's just astounding to see how they're already an A school, quite frankly. But they're going the extra steps of setting up programs with community hospital, so their kids are getting training while in high school, getting both credit and what will be job skills training to move right into jobs in the healthcare industry up in that region. Also, they referenced one student they had, I believe, about a year ago that graduated from Munster and went into college as a second semester student. That's how many college credits that student had obtained. And I think that's a very important goal that I know the boards had, where we've said that we want 25% of our Indiana students to graduate with college credits or industry certifications. And I think that's what I like best about our high school model.
That's called the Jim Edwards rule.
The Jim Edwards rule. Our high school model rewards and incentivizes school districts for taking care of those kids that can go faster and further. One of the discussions I know we had at one point was how to weight college and career readiness. The consensus, as I recall, was that it should be weighted a little heavier than 10% in the overall grade. Where did we settle with that as far as how much is college and career readiness weighted? And also, if you could just mention a little bit about some of the other incentives that we've done to make sure that college and career readiness are promoted.
Mm-hmm. Currently, it is 10%. I believe the rule has that set as increasing every year until it hits a certain point. I'm not sure what that point is, but it is an increasing factor because.
Well, we did put in for it to increase.
Yeah, let me explain why. One of this was the cleaning up of the dual credit, kind of the fidelity of dual credits, the fidelity because we were one of the first states to incorporate career and technical certifications into our school accountability model. We had to be certain that the pathways and the certifications we were approving were of the rigor necessary to warrant recognition for that. So the discussion we had was we would start at 10% and we would be working during the interim to make sure we had fidelity built in to the dual credits and the certifications, and then we would increase it, Tony, annually.
And your second question about continuing to incentivize high-performing schools?
Correct, because we've done some things with the model, such as reward school districts for the number of Core 40 honors diplomas, like the type of diploma that's awarded.
One of the things I'm very excited about, and this goes back to Dr. Bennett's point about schools going deeper into the data than they ever have before, is having the conversations around, we were an A this year, right? But now we have a new set of students coming in. How can we continue to get new cohorts of students who come in year after year to this high measure of success? And how can we look at the data that we're collecting that goes into A to F to understand who those students are who might be in our bottom 25%. How do we know who they are? What did we do with last year's group to generate high growth? How can we continue to do that? We didn't get the bonus on the top 75. How can we translate what we did with the bottom 25 to the top 75? At the high school level, what I think we'll see is those schools who realize that the bonus opportunity between 10th grade and 12th grade and hit that, they're going to transition and start to say, we don't want to hit that bonus anymore, because what we want to do is make sure every kid passes by the end of 10th grade. And that way we don't need to then have them pass between 10th and 12th. And so they'll have new goals and new ways to work at the student level to make sure that every student continues to hit the bar they need to hit in order to be an A. So I think schools will recognize new kids are coming through. We've hit some, we haven't hit others, and continue to build success in that fashion. So I really think those A schools will have some really robust conversations around what worked, what didn't, and how can we translate that success to other groups. I'm excited that I get to be part of those conversations.
Great.
What's the time frame on the IUIP waiver?
The time frame? It's 2-year waiver.
Okay.
I think, Sarah, it's a very intriguing question, because everyone is predicting some type of reauthorization discussion to start in January. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens to all the states that have waivers and how those will be phased in and out. But our waiver is for 2 years.
Is it possible in some way to, most importantly, publish to all the schools, but also inform you and the board what, for example, the 84% of the schools that moved in a high poverty environment actually did, and what the other schools that have, so that there's a broadening of the knowledge of the practices?
Absolutely.
Could we have some, maybe even present, where you see
Yes.
some exemplary, how they put their plan together, who participated?
Yes.
I think, as usual, Dave has a great insight there. What we want to do is learn that's a transformational move, to take a high poverty school and move it forward. That changes a lot of lives and changes communities. And we ought to be learning from the best and make it very, very available. Not that everybody will do it the same, but that's a good insight. Share it liberally and let it be public. Let their community take pride.
Tony, do we have to kind of
Yes.
officially approve?
Yes,
the,
so I guess you'd like me to call the question?
Well, no, I'm just clarifying.
Yes, we do have to officially approve the letter grades before they go up.
Okay.
So I will,
I move to approve.
we have a motion?
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? I want to thank the board for the discussion, and again, thank Will, Dale, thank all of our school teachers, our school leaders, everyone who has been part of this discussion. I want to thank them for their patience, their help, their support, their everything. So
I think that's very important, actually. I think we as a board, I'd like, well, I don't know if it needs a motion, but I think it would be very
It's a friendly
important
amendment to my motion.
to relay our thanks of the board, the appreciation of the board for all the work that the staff and other stakeholders have done. This is a lot of effort to collect this data and to analyze it, and I think it's important that staff hear that when they do things well. So,
and we didn't use every one of these, so I don't want to bow you over with this piece of data, but there are, 440 data points for every child. Now, we didn't use every one of these in the calculation, but I want you to just think about how much data there is today about our students and how much is really going into this. So, Neil, we will make sure we relay that. So we have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? So we can now post these to the website. Again, it'll be in spreadsheet form, so schools will know their grades. The report cards will be made public in about 2 weeks. Next item. Will, Dale, thank you very much. Go ahead, Becky.
It's an action item on, you're being asked to revise some proposed language, and Zach Foudy is here to fill you in on that.
So in August, we came to you with a proposal around dual credit, really to make sure we have good alignment between The approved dual credit list for the accountability system and for our honors diplomas. So we can give schools one list instead of saying, here's the honors diplomas list, here's the accountability list, and really making sure in the state board rule that those two lists are married. So we brought that to you in August, and upon further discussion, realized there was some issue with the word priority course list, partly because it's statutorily defined in another way. So we want to make sure there's a clean break between how it's defined in statute and how we define an in-state board rule. So the action today is to approve, I guess, a change to what was approved in August. And instead of using priority course list, it would be approved dual credit list. And if you have the memo, it's the indented part down at the bottom. So the definition would be approved dual credit list means the list of approved dual credit courses published by the Department of Education in consultation with the Commission for Higher Education. So this gives us the flexibility to work with the Commission and add courses as we deem necessary that meet that metric for what high quality dual credit is.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion, second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Zach.
The next item is a request to approve proposed language to change a section of the special ed rules, what we commonly call Article 7. We discovered over the past few months that Article 7 required parents' consent at a point in reevaluation when the federal rule didn't require it. And so in essence, we were creating issues with having parents having to sign twice for one process. So we want to amend the rule to reflect the federal requirement that it's a one-time consent. And so the language would be, as you saw in the memo, we basically striking a little and replacing a little. It's a minor change, but it will put us in compliance.
We have a motion. We have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? All right.
Becky, does that reflect on the discussion we had a couple of years ago or a year ago about how parents aren't involved as much in the process of an IEP for a student? There was some issues a couple of years back that I was very uncomfortable. It's not the same, is it?
This is not the same.
Technical? Okay, thank you.
I believe what you're referring to is the change from requiring parents to sign every IEP.
Right.
That was eliminated, and I believe that's what you're talking about. This is a small thing with reevaluation.
Gotcha. Well, I just wanted to clarify because I was against that.
This
I
is
thought
not the
parents
same thing.
should.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Parents still have to consent for reevaluation. Our rule required them to provide consent before we even looked at any old data.
Okay.
And it conflicted with another part.
Thank you.
We have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Next item is approval of the final readoption. There were the student services rules were set to expire. You approved that we readopt them. You now have to give a final approval so that they can be published and readopted.
Have a motion? We have a motion. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Your favorite.
An update on the accountability for Indiana School for the Blind and Indiana School for the Deaf. At the last meeting, there was some discussion about the data from the students enrolled at School for the Blind and the Deaf being attributed to the school corporation that sent them to those placements. I've since learned from the Chief Accountability Officer that they have corrected or provided a data collection field that now allows them to readily identify the school of accountability, which is the school that sends the student to ISB or ISD. So the problem we were discussing last time no longer exists. So what you've been asked to do by the General Assembly is to recommend how ISB and ISD should be held accountable. What we're proposing or suggesting is that the data for those students be used not only for the school corporation that sent them to ISB or ISD, but also be used to look at ISB and ISD's accountability. it's the same data being used for two entities. And that's the recommendation we've proposed here. I believe Dr. Bennett's going to talk briefly about, we're beginning to look at alternative accountability measures for schools that have different populations. For example, the DAMAR and ISD and ISB, where all the students are students with disabilities. And there's another school with the Excel Centers that we're looking at. How do we tweak that? So if there's an alternate accountability measure developed for like schools like DAMAR, then we would recommend that apply to ISB and ISD as well, because they would have the same population of students. Right now, we don't have anything other than 221.
And let me kind of just expand.
Yeah, please.
I don't want to confuse the issue any, but Becky brings up a great point. We have schools, and the best example besides DAMAR and ISD and ISB in the special needs population are your schools that are doing really what I would refer to drop-in work. They are bringing students back who had exited school. In many of those, the student has already been removed from the graduation cohort. So you can't even, the need to think differently around accountability for those schools is evident. So we will be embarking on these these kind of alternative schools, if you will, for lack of a better way to put it. Special population schools is probably the best way to say it. What is the right accountability measurement for those schools? Because frankly, they don't fit into what we just did. And there should be a measure of accountability. It's just finding the right measurements. So that's kind of what Becky is talking about. So our intent is, as we move to that for schools that have populations of special needs students, we should consider ISB and ISD in that discussion.
I might add, I was on the board for one of those alternative schools, and one of my biggest frustrations was their accountability would look terrible because the students were getting 1 credit a year. Mm-hmm. But that's 1 credit more than they would ever get, and it would seem that they should be focusing more on a career at that level, because there's no catching up once you're gone for 6 years or whatever. You dropped out at 10th grade with a 6-year reading level. So I just wanted to bring that forward while you had that on your plate.
We will be looking at that.
Thank you.
But Becky, go ahead, David, you have a question?
You're going to ask a question, I was going to ask. Go ahead.
Okay. My situation still is this, and help me understand it, because I'm asking for clarification. So, School A has these kids, and whether they go to the school that Joe's talking about, or whether they go to the Indiana School for the Blind and the Deaf, and they're going to go there, and they're going to be there 3 years, 4 years, who knows how long. But those scores are going to come back to David's school.
Tell us why. Somebody tell us why.
Because, for example, I've had a student who I met with before school starts. We hold the case conference. As a case conference committee, we agree what's best for that student is to attend the school for the blind. They get on a bus on Sunday night and are taken down by the corporation. They're given their education throughout the week. They come home on Friday afternoon. Again, our corporation provides the transportation for them. But then that accountability for his education is mine when I've not had 5 minutes of education time with the student.
Right.
That's my question. Am I understanding that correctly?
The school has made the decision that the person to educate the student on your behalf is the School for the Blind.
But the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf, which is the only, if it's okay, let's just leave it at those two schools.
Sure, no, that's fine.
Because they're the only schools we got to vote on today.
Right.
They have to accept the child, right? I mean, when that child goes from the district to that school, they accept that child, and this is all about having what's the accountability of the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf.
Right.
I have a very hard time understanding why we should and how we could hold a sending district accountable once the transfer's taken place.
Okay, here, and I'm going to throw another penny in here, okay, because this is causing me confusion too. Let's change it to a student that we have that might be emotionally disabled, emotionally handicapped, and is a hard guy to handle in my school. And I don't have the central program for that child, okay?
Are they going to one of these two schools?
No, I'm just...
I just want to talk about that at a later meeting, not this meeting.
Okay. Well, in a way, and I don't know if it connects or not, Dave. So I appreciate that. But so David's got this kid that's kind of, whether this kid and he's gonna come over here to Joe's school because he's a hard kid to educate, and we're sympathetic to that. And the way I'm understanding it is so. Mike, who's a hard kid to educate, is sent over to Joe's school because that's where the centralized program is. And we're going to test that child. And when that kid doesn't pass, where does the penalty go? I mean, who suffers? But right now, who suffers? And I hate to say, maybe that's not the word. I don't know what the correct word is.
Who's held accountable?
Who's held accountable? When Mike over here, who's really a hard kid to educate, and for a variety of reasons goes to Joe's school, and he doesn't pass.
Well, right now, Mike, in my area,
But
River Forest High School suffers
but
because they have the program, and that grade does not go back. That accountability does not go back to the sending school, and that's been a real issue. Because why would you even try to develop programs to help your students when you could just send them to the consortium and let the consortium take the weight?
The question is, David, is this, and this is the one that's confusing me. Should I continue to feel responsible for Mike? He lives next door to me, but he's over here, and he's not passing. And I think the question is, now I'll take it back to the Indiana School for the Blind. The kid lives beside me. He goes to that school. He goes to the Indiana School for the Blind, and he's not passing. Do I still feel responsible? Even he lives in my district next to me.
I assume you'd feel morally responsible for making the right decision to recommend him to the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf. And I think, am I correct? Those are the only two schools you've asked us to.
Yes, sir.
So if we can limit it to that, once you say, I think Dave ought to be in your school, and the School for the Blind or the School for the Deaf says, yes, we take Dave, they're the people providing all the education, and whatever accountability system this stuff produces ought to fit that environment.
I understand what everyone's saying. I think there are two pieces of this that I think and I'm not sure where the landing spot is. But I don't want to give the impression that because we make a decision that a student is best served at the Indiana School for the Blind or Indiana School for the Deaf, that the sending school corporation washes their hands of the responsibility to that student. I mean, as a district, that decision is made locally in a case conference, and implied in that case conference discussion is that we are still actively involved. Ann, would you want to come up here and sit down? Because I'm going to speak to this strictly on a personal basis, okay?
And Ann represents who?
She is exceptional learners. So she's over this department. This is Ann Davis. But as a superintendent or a principal, when we had to make those discussions and they were done in case conference committees, I got to tell you that it makes me feel uncomfortable to paint that okay, we just made the decision the child goes to the blind school or the deaf school, therefore we're finished. I think there's an implied responsibility that we should be doing what we can do to also communicate with the blind school, deaf school, whatever we can do. Because Ann, you want to talk about that?
When those, specifically with Indiana School for the Blind and Indiana School for the Deaf, the only way students can't enroll kind of like off the street. They can't show up at the doorstep and enroll. It's only through the case conference committee decision. and it's considered part of the continuum of services. So districts are required to have a full continuum of services for their students. If it's a service that they cannot provide and they have to seek services elsewhere, like Indiana School for the Blind or School for the Deaf, when the district is making that decision as part of the case conference committee, they're not absolving their responsibility. What they're saying is, this is part of the case, this is part of the continuum of services, and this is what's best for this child. I mean, as you said so well, this is what's best for this child to provide the appropriate services. We as the district have decided that this is the best, most appropriate placement for this child, and that's why the student is going there. And that's why it's still an annual case conference committee as to what are the appropriate services for that child, so that every year you're revisiting that decision to say, is this still the most appropriate decision? And that's why the responsibility of the IEP still rests with the Corp of Legal Settlement and not with School for the Blind or School for the Deaf, because that Corp of Legal Settlement is still responsible.
Sorry, I understand that, but that's different than holding the sending corporation accountable for the performance of the student. That just doesn't make any sense. That school corporation is not providing any kind of direct education to that student, and therefore to kind of say that they're going to be included, I mean, it's just, unless that school corporation can influence what happens at the School for the Blind or the Deaf. And Tony, I understand your point, and to my mind, there's a difference between responsibility and accountability, even if it's subtle. Yes, you have to maintain the connection, and yes, you have to check in, but to actually, put that student's performance or grades or growth back into the sending school corporation's evaluation just doesn't make sense. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of our system, which is trying to measure how those teachers and principals are doing in educating children.
I appreciate Dave's effort to keep this separated from the other ones. But, I hate to say this, but then we come back to the gaming situation of the testing, and the good and bad of the testing, but the gaming situation of the testing is, this kid's not going to pass. I'm going to send him over here. And I'm not going to be responsible for that score.
What's even more ironic is that, and I know we're trying to change this, but for now, the sending school corporation gets either dinged or rewarded, and nothing happens to the School for the Blind or the Deaf, even though they're the ones that are providing the education. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Remind us, I know this, but I want to know the particulars, be reminded of some particulars, the governance and responsibility, and who has the say over the School for the Blind and the Deaf, and where's the accountability? Because you could say that's the best place for a student, but you could send them thinking, but I don't think it's very well run. It just happens to be the best of the worst choices. I'm not saying that, by the way, about these schools. I'm speaking it theoretically. But so who's in charge, accountable and governance over these schools? Who appoints that board? How does that work?
Those are gubernatorial. Those are technically state agencies.
They're not
agencies. They don't come back to this board. And the appointments to those boards are made by the governor.
Yes, sir.
And there are certain requirements, I think. There are a certain number of parents or people who have those disabilities who have to be on the board. So,
and I think neither the department nor the board nor the sending district has any ability to tell either of those schools what to do or how to do it with each child.
So I could be. Having been, you can be in a situation where you have a child and you can say, well, I think we could do this for them. I wish where I was going to send them was better, but I think they can do what I do a touch more. But usually when you contract to help you fulfill your mission, or whether you get some influence and you have some choices and you get seats on the board, you get input, or there's some dynamic there, and maybe we need to go back to the fundamental setup and challenge in a world of accountability. Every child gets to learn, et cetera. Maybe there's a fundamental question we need to go back to here. And it is convenient and important to isolate this as one instance, but you can start sending students a lot of places, and then who's held accountable for that? And where does the superintendent say, well, if we have a consortium running a certain type of school for young people with certain kind of problems, Who's on that board? How are we influencing the program? Is it accountable? It seems locally you can have more control. This is really distant. And I don't know how you,
But I would say when you're choosing those programs, you're choosing the most appropriate program. And if that's not the most appropriate program, I mean, districts have that decision as to what they can do. I mean, there are,
inform me of the options.
well, you have School for the Blind and School for the Deaf, but if you have
Right.
students with any disability and that school isn't able to serve them for those most involved children,
Right.
I mean, there are additional dollars that are state funded that help support those students so that it doesn't become, you know, the responsibility in terms of financially on that LEA.
Solely, yeah.
But at the same time, you know, respectfully, I appreciate your perspective that about the accountability going back to the corporate of legal settlement. But ultimately, when they're sitting that case conference committee, what they're saying is, thank you, that is the most appropriate placement for that child. So when they say it's the most appropriate, they still have ownership of that student in that they're saying if that's most appropriate, that's the best place to serve that child. They then have, when they're saying that's most appropriate, I think they still have a responsibility to say, if we made this choice because it's most appropriate or it's best for this child, then we're saying it's the best program.
So where's-
and therefore you still have an ownership of that child.
Where's the accountability then for the school, let's pick on the school of the blind, not concretely, but just in theory. Where's their accountability to provide an excellent program?
Well, that's what we're being asked to
Right.
provide. But I still insist there's a difference between responsibility and accountability. Yes, they still have ownership of that child, but that doesn't mean they should be held accountable in their grade, in their, you know, in this relatively high stakes evaluation for the performance of that child when they've had no ability to influence the day-to-day education of that child. It doesn't make any sense.
Is there any stated expectation for communication between the sending district and servicing school?
I would say that there is. I would say that the corporate legal settlement can still have a teacher of record who, by law, has lots of responsibilities for that student, even if they're not interacting with that student on a day-to-day basis.
Are you talking about the blind school and the deaf school now?
No, I'm talking about the corporate legal settlement can still have a teacher of record if they so choose.
For the blind school and the deaf school?
Correct. And the blind school and deaf school can have a teacher of service who is serving that student every day. And by law, the teacher of record and the teacher of service can work collaboratively together to ensure that services are being provided for that student. And in the world of the way things should work, right, we would want them to be collaborating all year long for that student, not simply at an annual case review. We would want those institutions to be talking. The idea is not that we send students to the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind when they are in third grade and the corporate legal settlement never sees those students again, right? We want students to get the services and supports they need. And for some students, they may need to be there their entire educational career, but other students, they may not. We don't want this to be a case where because you simply are a student who is deaf and or blind, that you go to those institutions and you never go back to your typical environment,
Yeah,
right?
but nobody's arguing that. I mean, nobody's disputing you on that. The issue is when you're at the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf, should the sending corporation be measured, be graded, be held accountable for how that student does? And I don't think the answer is yes. I think it's no. When they come back to the district, if they go in third grade and they're ready to come back to the district in fifth, when they're back in the district, then yes, the district needs to be held accountable. But when they're at the School for the Blind, they have to have ownership, they have to have engagement, but it's not fair to hold them accountable because they're not providing the teaching.
So Neil, let me, again, I don't want to.
I don't know if this even matters. I don't know if we can change this.
I don't think we really can because it's in statute, but I also just want to say this.
Okay, then I'm wasting.
No, because, but I do want to show where we kind of are having also another discussion, because we approved measurements and we approved grades today for high schools where students go to career and tech ed centers and get a certification that the high school has really nothing to do with providing that, yet that high school is getting credit for that.
But they chose it, and they had options, I assume.
But the point is that Career and Tech Ed Center is providing all the instruction.
Yeah, but who governs that? Isn't it a local group of superintendents, a consortium?
I think that's a good point.
See, that's why I was trying to get to governance.
It's not quite the same.
Yeah, if I have a lot of options, that's an issue, because then I made some selection, and if I have some control over governance, a group of superintendents put together a consortium, they've been empowered by their board to work together to create an option, we can trace a line back to who's accountable.
We do the same thing with virtual AP courses. The school district may not have a virtual AP course, but yet that student goes and does that virtual AP course, and the school gets credit for that toward their letter grade. That's an accountability measure.
The bottom line for today is I certainly agree, whatever we disagree about the sending corporation, I certainly agree that the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf should be subject to accountability. And so in that sense, I support very much the memo and the recommendation that we're going to send to the to the General Assembly. And obviously if it's in statute that the sending corporation is responsible, I regret that, and Mike, maybe we need to talk to our legislators about it, but there's no sense belaboring it here.
No, and Becky, I want to clarify for the board, that is in statute, correct?
There's a statute under the section on students with disabilities, and it talks about if the student's school corporation of legal settlement sends the student into another school corporation for services and programming, that all the student data goes back to the accountability for
statute.
For the.
Just give me the
It's
Indiana.
2035-8-1C, and it's relatively new, Mike. It's been in the past few years that they added that.
Is that Indiana code? Or is
Yes,
that 20?
Indiana code.
Okay. And that's what goes back to the sending corporation?
Yeah, it says student data including ISTEP programs, testing scores, academic progress, grade level, and graduation data for a student described in subsection A shall be included in the determination for the school corporation in which the student has legal settlement.
So Becky, what do we do with like some of the consortia where that's just not happening?
I don't.
Like at least one of, I know there's a consortium up in Lake County with River Forest, where River Forest is getting all that data and they're getting the accountability for all those students, and it's not going back to the sending school.
The chief accountability officer, John Gubera, before he left, told me that while it was intended that the scores go back, we did not have a good mechanism for collecting that data to ensure that it went back. That issue has been resolved.
Okay.
And so from this point forward, it will.
Becky, I have a question. Can you go back and read that very last piece of that statute? Go back to the sending school corporation.
Data goes back to where?
To the school corporation in which the student has legal settlement.
So my question now, and this is really weedy, and it's the
Okay.
it's the guy who likes to be the policy wonk in the room, so I apologize. To Carrie's original question, does that necessarily go to the school, or is that accountability at the corporation level? Because in
Probably
my
just
opinion,
corporation.
Because most of those students aren't participating in the alternate assessment. Correct. So the vast majority of those kids are not participating in ISTEP, so it's going to affect the corporation.
so it will not affect
The building.
the building or the teacher involved at the building. It will involve corporation.
Right. So
That's
it's
my
im-
understanding.
It's important to remember that they would not generally have ISTEP data associated with those students.
Read that for me one more time, please.
Student data, including ISTEP program testing scores, academic progress, grade level, and graduation date for a student described in subsection A shall be included in determinations for the school corporation in which the student has legal settlement.
So,
School corporation of legal settlement.
so Mike, I think it goes
So
back.
you're saying all scores, I mean, tell me, I'm being ridiculous here. All scores from a student, does it say a sending school corporation?
School corporation of legal settlement is the one who has sent the student somewhere else.
Does it say in there sending?
Well,
No, it's not, because I'm just getting to a bigger thing with all
No, you
this.
are. I know where you're going.
Hey, with all this stuff that's going on with vouchers and across boundaries and everything else, it says legal settlement.
well, but it refers
No,
you back to section A, subsection A, which says,
Okay.
if a student with legal settlement in a school corporation is transferred to attend school
now we
in another
needed
school
that, please.
corporation, it's when legal
I know where you were
settlement
going, though.
sends the
Yeah,
student.
because I just wanted to make sure
Yes.
that law
So-
wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
So then
that's
the only
transfer.
The only impact, if I understand this correctly, the only impact, one, it would impact the school corporation, and you would have to look at your alternative assessment cap. the percentage of your students alternatively assessed. But it would not, to Carrie's original question, going back to where we started the discussion, it doesn't affect the local school building or teacher in that building.
Because that alternative assessment cap's a big deal right now, and I'd hate to see this as a,
There are also ways that districts can apply for exceptions to that through the federal regulations, and so that would be something that a district could apply for an exception based on that.
Now, the amendment you propose simply says that this, you want to amend the statute so this board tells the School for the Blind and the School for the Deaf what their
Just like you do
results
for.
are, using the same system
Yes.
as in sub A here.
Just-
So,
'Cause that's all that's
in essence,
available.
instead of being accountable only to their own gubernatorially appointed board, they would now be accountable to this board for purposes of the educational results of the students.
That's where I was going. So that would.
You would be responsible for approving the final grade and then reporting that to the General Assembly and perhaps the governor, who really has the control over those entities.
And do you ladies think that we would do that with or without amendments recognizing the issues those students are dealing with when they come up against the assessment system that we have?
I think that we would likely have to look at what those scores end up being and then probably give you all some further information so you can make appropriate decisions about what those grades mean in relationship to those populations of students.
Well, because this goes back to early on in the meeting, Joe brought up other assessments, because this talks about ISTEP and other. So we're going to learn a little here, it looks like.
Likely, yes.
Yeah, and we're going to make sure there's a governance system where they're accountable back someplace so we know what's happening in these two important schools.
But this is not much different than what's happening with open enrollment and PHM, for example. I think that would be an ideal way to handle it in terms of open enrollment. If they're transferring to the School of the Blind, that's where that whole accountability, because it makes them more responsible. It doesn't make us less caring. It just makes us responsible in terms of accountability through the School of the Blind, who have 100% or 90% of the time with the child. I mean, it's not any different than that.
Just out of curiosity, have we talked to the School of the Blind and the School of the Deaf about this?
We've had conversations with them. I'm sure Becky's had conversations with them prior years before about these pieces. I mean, they absolutely want to serve students. They want to do a good job in terms of academics. They also know that they oftentimes get students who academically are really behind once they begin to serve them. I think both of their superintendents would tell you that's their biggest challenge, is that it's hard because when they get them, they often are at such a deficit. And so really measuring that becomes difficult.
And I'm sorry for the facts. How many students are we talking about here, statewide?
I would say I would have to go back. I can't recall. Between 500 and 600 total students.
About 140 School for the Blind and the rest is School for the Deaf, as an estimate.
So if we still thinking about the issue of accountability imposed back, if we think about this as 500 over roughly 300 school districts, we'd be talking about one or two kids. I know it's not on average,
Yeah,
but
because it's interesting. The school that I'm at houses the program for the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind. So I've got so I went back and just had this conversation with our groups just to kind of getting some information. It seems like that is there a school corporation that disproportionately has a larger number of these kids? There are, and I said okay. And so my question was, is that fair or not fair? And then please tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm being just. So I asked why that would be, and it says it's not unusual, possibly for, let's say, folks who are deaf to gather in the same neighborhoods because they of being able to work with the whole thing, and so. Are we penalizing the school that has possibly, a situation that's where they're living. So that was a question for me too, and I did, so that's, I don't know.
That is actually, I would say that's one of the allowable exceptions in the federal regulations, that if you have a school or health or other community-based facility that draws in a large number of families that are seeking those services, you can apply for an exception with your calculating system so that district isn't penalized, because since there's a program nearby, families move there for exactly the reasons you're saying, because we do see a larger population of children coming from districts closer to those schools.
Okay.
And so that way that court of legal settlement would not be penalized because those families have chosen to move there for closer access so that they can live closer to where their children are getting services.
Okay, so with that, and David's comment so I'll just get Lisa on the table for you, Tony, how's that?
That sounds great.
With that, and so that, with that situation, it sounds like the motion is to accept a recommendation coming from the DOE of the system on how the schools for the blind and the deaf are going to be graded, and also that the scores go back to the sending schools.
Sending corporations.
Sending corporations, and not individual schools. I'll make that motion that happen, with the reservation of still, because I still don't have clarification on, is that whole concept of school corporations or schools having too many people on alternative assessments and being penalized. That's a reservation. So there's my motion.
We have a motion? Second. We have a motion second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Becky, we got that one accomplished for you. Yeah, it was a very good, I appreciate the discussion.
I think it opens up some other areas of conversation that
Yeah.
probably need to happen, the alternative and...
Absolutely.
Okay, consent agenda. It's a large one this time, but we'll move through it pretty quickly. The acceptance of the Consolidated Purchasing Survey, that is just your acceptance. Every year, we provided it to you. Approval of the Common School Fund advances, a little over $17 million has been requested for technology projects, and your paperwork gave you a description of the various projects that schools were proposing. We're asking for approval of new course titles. We would like to rename 2 math courses and remove a course title. We're asking to withdraw LSA document number 11772. This was the proposed rule we were looking at on procedures and timelines for ISTEP rescore and distribution. And as we got into that, we found some implementational challenges that have caused us to reconsider, so we'd like to withdraw it at this time. Approval of school requests to change test date windows, Burris, Bloomington Project School, and Lincoln School in Evansville due to school calendars.
Those are always before the scheduled test
Yes.
dates.
They're all 2
Correct?
weeks early for either
Okay.
iRead or the iStep Applied Skills. Yes.
Okay.
Seymour has asked for approval of their governing body selection plan that makes them comport with the requirement that school board elections are next week. And we were asking for approval of the summer iRead 3 testing dates for the upcoming summer from June 3rd through July 26th.
Julie, you still here? Julie Slavens, are you still here? And we'll do this. And I just want some clarifications before I make a thing on this. If it's a state law that all the school board elections are going to be held in the fall, why do school corporations have to get that approved here?
If they make a formal change to their governing body selection plan, that has to come through the board.
But I'm just saying, Julie disagrees.
No, if they change the plan, but I don't think they have to change the plan because it's state law, and the plan has to comply with state law. So we've taken the position, ISBA, that the school corporation doesn't have to change their plan because state law says all school boards are going to be
But the plan says spring election.
State law will override the plan.
So does the plan have to come here or not?
If they change the plan, yes, but they don't have to.
Well, but if you're changing if it's been changed and we're changing it in our policy when the plan is,
Mike.
because I'm back, and she knows my school attorney. I'm thinking, we're following state law, and we've moved from a spring to a fall election.
But you didn't come.
But why do I have to send it here? Yes or no?
If you don't change your plan, you don't have to send it to the state board.
Isn't this for people that come from non-elected?
But state
it's a
law
lot.
is going to override the plan, even though the plan says something.
They're just doing it for protection.
Schools have gotten different advice, and Julie's
Yeah.
folks and DOE's attorneys have talked, and there is a disagreement about whether or not the state law automatically changes all your plans without any approval.
Okay,
But
Becky,
boards have taken-
would you recommend that Adams Central send you a change that says we're going to have fall elections?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Julie, she says no. That's okay. All right. See, okay, so with that, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Have a motion? Yes.
Didn't we motion and second already?
No.
No,
Okay.
do we have a second? We have a motion second. Now a question.
The school fund, I'm glad to see it's going to technology. Are there other technology grants that I could find out about later? Is there a list, or is this what everybody's using?
That's what everybody's using right now.
Okay.
But there are technology grants that are not inside the
Right.
department.
Are we thinking about that down the road? Thank you.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The next items for discussion, and I just want to say two things. One, we have intervention. When we talk about school interventions, and I just want to give the board a quick apology and tell you that given the current national weather issue, Edison cannot be here in person today. They are stuck on the East Coast in the flights that are all canceled. So I think we're going to try to have them here by phone. Am I right, Jim? I also wanted to share with you, and while this doesn't exactly include the turnaround school operators, I just came across a piece of information I think is very important for this board to hear. Our lead partner schools, Broad Ripple was one of the top gaining high schools in the state, moving from an F to a B. And George Washington Community High School went from an F to a C. So if we're looking for some validation that in terms of data performance we are seeing a change, I think we can look at the lead partner discussion, especially at Broad Ripple and George Washington, and say, we have some success there, and I think we also we'll have another data point next year as Dr. White continues to unroll the Voyager option that we approved earlier this year. So with that, Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
So down the road, I think I did mention or email this, the possibility of when we get these written reports, we don't have to spend as long Thank you.
That's why you
'Cause I
got the
read all the
summaries and
reports, yeah.
all the spreadsheets.
Hey, Tyler, it's Chip. I'm just going to put you on mute, but I'll unmute you when we get to questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As Dr. Bennett said, I do want to start with echoing his comments around the exciting news pertaining to Broad Ripple and George Washington's 2011-2012 academic grade, and really just share a great deal of appreciation to the teachers, the staff, the principals, the district officials, Dr. White, Dr. Johnson, Mrs. Rambo, who have worked in concert with our lead partners, with our staff here internally, to apply this approach with the utmost of fidelity and integrity over the last year, and want to just formally congratulate those two schools, their staff, their students, community partners, many others who have worked formally and then also in this last academic year to improve these two schools. Not only have the high school letter grades improved, so there are two different grades. There's a middle school grade and a high school grade. The high school grades improved the most dramatically, as Dr. Bennett highlighted, one at Broad Ripple from F to a B, the other Washington F to a C, but also the middle school grades improved, F to a D at George Washington and F to a C at Broad Ripple. So we'd all agree that there's still plenty of work to be done. This turnaround work is not just a 1-year enterprise, and so our lead partners, staff internally, district staff, school staff, continue to work to not only improve the school's letter grade, but also to tackle things that were just beyond the realm of possibility to really go deep with last year. And those are things such as advanced placement performance, college and career readiness, readiness and other college career readiness indicators, the Common Core state standards. Many other topics are sort of being added in this year as systems are being implemented, taking root, and having the capacity now to explore and go deeper in other arenas. So we're excited about the work that's been done this year, but are not resting in any way, shape, or form. So Dr. Brennan mentioned there's also the intervention at John Marshall Community High School, which is well underway. Voyager Learning has completed long ago its very robust needs assessment and is implementing a full battery of interventions ranging from targets at school culture to student academic supports. We meet with them both in person and via phone 2 different times separately every month, and are formalizing our dates for our on-site audit in December, in which we'll use the exact same Mass Insight high-performing, high-poverty schools framework to track progress on those key qualitative indicators in the readiness to learn, teach, and act arenas to see what is progressing from that perspective. We'll also be collecting acuity data and December ECA retest data to be able to, in January, provide a very robust and comprehensive update on where things stand with this intervention. So I'll leave it at that for the lead partners, but pause to take any questions you might have before diving into the other turnaround work. I wanted to go back to something that Dave mentioned earlier around how do we then document those best practices at our high-performing, high-poverty schools. And something that we don't often talk about in this room are the efforts that are underway within the Office of School Improvement and Turnaround to, in part, do just that. So we have a team of 5 specialists who work with a portfolio of Title I served low-performing schools to provide them with additional technical assistance, both at the school improvement planning process stage and, of course, then in terms of its implementation. So this work primarily is targeted towards our lower-performing schools, as you might imagine, but later this week, now that the grades are finalized, we'll also be sending a memo to our A, B, and C Title I served schools and asking them for the opportunity to, provide them with an extra set of eyes and ears in terms of leveraging some of our internal technical assistance to help them continue on the course they're on, but also to document those things that are working and then share those best practices with the field. Yep, please.
A lot of times boards and senior administrators trade a lot of information and best practice documents and what's happened. Is it reasonable and valuable, and I don't know how you do it, to get input from teachers who were there before, we intervened and helped and provided assistance, and then the difference they experience in the school from a teacher level and possibly even students? I mean,
I think that's a great point.
Is this, high level? Did the school culture and processes and procedures actually change? Did they see it? How did they feel about it, either through surveys, focus groups, or what's the reality here of part of our whole move here is to take and move schools forward? Be interesting from that perspective. Can we do that? How valuable would it be?
I think it's absolutely. It's both possible and valuable. So one example of a school that we're already continuing to work with that showed one of the most dramatic jumps is Dickinson Fine Arts Academy. It's a school that had been an F for 4 straight years, now is an A. We're continuing to work with them through a school improvement grant they've received. And as a part of that, having the opportunity to sit down with leadership, with teachers, and we can also involve students we haven't to date, but we certainly can, to have those conversations. That's just one example, but there are definitely ways to try to scale that. And I think it provides us with value. South Bend. South Bend. I think that's very valuable.
Absolutely. It'd just be interesting input to see the day in the life kind of thing before and after.
Absolutely.
And the steps they felt. You get a sense of not only the data, but the pride or lack of, or interesting to me.
Absolutely. So we'll have some time to share sort of those lessons learned in future meetings, but wanted to highlight that work is happening as a part of ours, as Dr. Ben alluded to, part of our sort of comprehensive or differentiated approach to working with low-performing schools. We often focus on what's happening at our schools that have hit a certain point of low performance, but that work is happening in earnest and is a large part of our efforts to ensure that the numbers of schools that do hit year 5, as Dr. Bennett said, we have 1 in year 5 this year. We have 5 schools in year 4, but of those 5 schools that have hit year 4, 2 of those 5 have reopened this year. And when they reopened, they inherited their old accountability history. So only 3 of those are ones that we've been working with. 2 we're now working with now that they've reopened. And so the numbers are continuing to go down, which is ultimately what we want to see, because it means that schools are improving for the students and communities that serve earlier. And that's what we're driving after through these initiatives. On the other end of the spectrum, we have our turnaround representatives from our turnaround school operators here today. You were provided in advance a snapshot of some key data points around each of the turnaround academies. And additionally, for this month's update, you, I'm sure, have noticed the inclusion of student benchmark data as pertains to English and math skills. And this data, of course, is really crucial to both inform our perspective on where we are as a baseline, but also for our turnaround school operators as they use that data to inform the supports and services that they're providing to their students to ensure their academic needs are best met. Next month's meeting will occur at one of our turnaround academies. As was suggested at a previous meeting, we want to take that opportunity to have these conversations in one of those settings, and to let that setting then inform some of our update around the turnaround work, particularly at that one school. Today, in advance of next month's meeting, today's update was largely provided in advance, but we also have representatives either via phone or here in person that can answer any questions you might have, either about the data that you were provided or other questions involving the Turnaround Academy. So I'll open it up for questions with that. I'll unmute Todd if there's any questions for Todd involving the work at Roosevelt College and Career Academy. All right.
To really publicize the significant growth and improvement at Washington and Broad Ripple. There was a lot of community concern about the engagement of the lead partners, and I think the success is really very, very impressive, and I'd like to see it celebrated as much as possible. It's a very legitimate cause for
Absolutely.
Teacher and staff turnover numbers, would you view them as consistent with experience at most other similarly situated schools, or is there anything to think about there?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. I think that in a turnaround environment where the demands on teachers are pronounced for the obvious reasons that is largely contributes to that, and then some of it is just it's a different teaching environment. The expectations are higher, the stakes are higher, and for some that becomes something that at the beginning made a lot of sense. It was really enticing, but when it comes down to the brass tacks, a change is needed, either at the acknowledgement of the teacher or the acknowledgement of the school operator.
Jim, I'll accept your comment that the stakes are higher, but I don't know if the expectations are higher.
Fair.
How's that? Because I think all schools have the expectations are higher.
That's fair.
So.
Anything else?
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
We have just a brief item on some more discussion on iRead 3, and I don't know if that's Amy or Wes or both. All right.
Let me just make a very quick comment. We will have some results regarding final results of iRead 3. I think that will be the December 3rd board meeting. Is that right, Wes? Yep. I think I can generally frame it to say that if you believe today was good news, I believe you'll feel much the same way when we get to the December 3rd meeting about the composite of iRead 3.
Yeah, that's already done. We're good with that.
Do you want to just tell us?
Sure.
Okay.
Nice
So,
guy.
so today we wanted to just bring to your attention.
Well, I want to make sure everybody knows that
Didn't even look.
today is Halloween. In case you. I did. Yeah, there are a lot of frightened children right now.
West the assessment side.
So today we just wanted to bring to your attention that we're considering an additional opportunity for students to take the iRead 3 test. And this is in response to feedback we've gotten from the field asking for additional local control and flexibility. And so we have begun, at the request of Dr. Bennett, our analysis of looking at kind of the logistics of that, as well as the impact on students and the potential budget impact if we were to do this. We are looking for this as possible for 2013 and specifically possible for the fall of 2013. We are in process now working with our vendor. We're looking at additional items for forms. We have a lot of legwork to do, but we just wanted to let you know that we're trying to be responsive to the field and their requests for additional flexibility and control.
And we mainly wanted to bring it to you, or I mainly wanted to bring it to you, because in order to do that, we were going to have to pilot some additional items this spring. In order to have another form of the test, it means that there will be some piloting of iRead 3 items this spring when we administer the test, so that we would have an additional secure form that would be required for this. And so that's some work that if it's going to happen, we've got to go ahead and start down that path. And it won't impact the dates that you've approved, but it will place some additional burden on the sample of schools that will be asked to participate in that piloting of those items.
Again, just kind of go back where this came from. This discussion kind of all manifested from, schools are handling this issue of remediation or the third grade retest. There are all kinds of different implementations for this. And in seeing that, I had a couple of, superintendents who I have an incredible amount of respect for their instructional knowledge say, does it make sense that if we have kids and we're using a 3-4 split classroom? That was specifically the question. And Mike, I think we actually had that discussion here at the table. If we're using a 3-4 split classroom, does it make sense to have a potential another administration so that if that child passes that final administration, that child can then be assessed as a fourth grader? And that was where this whole discussion began. So I just kind of wanted to give everyone a context that of where that was, where we started.
And part of this other discussion is this: since there are consequences to the percent of kids that maybe pass the iRead, am I wrong or right on that? To school corporations, 90 percentile or reading programs and all that kind of stuff? Okay. Are the consequences from the first test, or are they from the test after a kid's been retested? If you take the CPA exam and don't pass it the first time, but pass it the second time, are you still a CPA?
Sure.
Are you still a qualified CPA? Are you an A CPA? My question is, are schools being judged? Should they be judged really by after the series of tests and the number of kids that pass iRead and all the consequences that go with it versus the March test?
Yeah, I think, Mike, that's a discussion, frankly, we probably do want to have after the December meeting when we take a look at this data. Currently, it is after the first administration,
It's after the March test.
But I want to say it's not part of our current accountability system either.
I understand that, but there are consequences, and we just gave accolades to these schools that are making adjustments and making sure that kids get through that hoop, but we're still going to penalize them because they didn't pass in the March test. I don't like that.
Wes, is this going to cost more money?
Yes.
Yeah.
How much? Do you know?
Don't know yet.
I mean, we have an estimate on, we think of the number of items. So there's two costs. There's a one-time cost to develop the additional items for another secure form. And then based on the number of students who would be eligible for this test, which is frankly a very small proportion of the 83,000 plus students who took the test, there'd be the actual cost of administration that's an ongoing cost, would be potentially an ongoing cost for those students. I mean, we're talking, I'm going to say in the couple of $100,000 range.
Really? Then why 6.5 weeks isn't enough? I don't know. I guess I apologize. I'm just a little slow on this stuff. I don't understand why we're providing 6.5 week window. Schools are asking for an additional week and a half, and it's going to cost several $100,000 to provide that extra week and a half. That doesn't make any sense to me. So what am I missing?
So that summer opportunity is a retest after the initial remediation.
Right.
Okay? And we actually made the window a little bit larger this year. We're starting it earlier because we have the forms on the ground. We're able to roll those out. This is an opportunity after, essentially, I would say the first quarter of instruction in the next school year, that there'd be an October opportunity after students they weren't successful in the summer, but now they've received an additional instruction, and that's been the request from schools. Again,
So when you say fall, you're thinking an October test? November test?
Yeah.
The memo.
Versus an August test.
Right.
There are implications for when we do the testing, so we're really looking at that pretty carefully.
Okay, so I first look at it, I think an August test. But you're really thinking more, as Tony was referring to, that kid that did not pass third grade but went into fourth grade, you went into a 3-4 split, whatever you want to call it, went into a fourth grade section because he passed everything else. What you guys got to understand is this: kids are not passing the iRead, but passing iStep in both math and language. So just know those kids are out there that aren't passing iRead, but they're passing iStep in language and math, and we're still keeping them in third grade.
All right, but that's got nothing to do with what's on I'm reading the memo here. It says that the summer 2012 testing window was 6.5 weeks in length. Schools have requested an earlier start date. We are proposing June 3rd for a total of 8 weeks. That's an extra week and a half in my simple math. What am I missing, and why
We're talking about two different issues, right?
Right.
We're talking about two different issues.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
Are we?
I apologize for the confusion.
Is there a
One
different
is-
memo, or what?
Yeah.
Oh, the assessment date change, or did I
It's
not?
a memo, notice of
Yeah.
department's consideration of additional administration of the iRead 3 assessment.
Oh, crumbs. Sorry.
Yeah. And then I need to retract my answer to your question, which is there isn't any additional cost for the extended summer window since the majority of that testing is done online. So there isn't any cost there. The cost that I was talking about is for the October 24th memo that you have.
Okay. Bear with me here.
Where we're looking at that potential additional fall opportunity for students to take the test.
And that's the basic point, is there's requests from the field for a student who has twice failed to have a third opportunity to demonstrate reading capacity for the third grade, even while they're in the beginning of the fourth grade.
But they are not officially called a fourth grade student. Because they can't be.
But they'd be in the fourth grade classes, wouldn't they?
Well, if Tony's, we're not calling
3-4.
them.
Depends how you're.
It's totally local. I mean, that's a totally local decision. And I've actually had a couple conversations with superintendents that said, if we did this right, I would move the kid into a fourth grade classroom.
Or the kid is in as we're calling it.
A split class.
We call it a split class.
Blended class, whatever.
We call it that because we can't put the kid in fourth grade. But the reality is we can get him, after a first quarter.
Anyway, it's another it's a consideration. And again, we just wanted to make you aware that we are considering looking at that. There is no action that's needed. No. We just wanted to bring it to the board for your awareness.
This is an issue, this has to do your rule around this test, and we just wanted to make sure that you knew that we were considering this change.
Thank you. Now we have Spotlight on Learning, and this is Connexus and Ivy Tech, who has put together a very innovative program. We talked earlier, and it's I would like to say we planned it this way, but I can't. I don't think we can take this much credit. We talked earlier about the high school accountability model having career and technical education certifications and dual credit, and how we look at those pathways. And Connexus, Steve Dwyer came in to see me, Steve, almost 2 years ago. And as a result of all this work, Connexus has worked with Ivy Tech and has worked with a number of school corporations and schools on developing a program around advanced manufacturing and logistics. And so today, I thought it was a great opportunity for them to come in and share with you how this program works, Ivy Tech's involvement, how it works at the local level with school corporations and schools, and see how this type of thing can really be a benefit to students and to schools and their accountability model. So, Steve, I'll turn it over to you. And Tom. It's hiding behind my name plate. Because I'll play with it if I didn't set it aside.
I'll take it to begin with. Just here?
I think so.
Okay. First of all, thanks, Tony, and everybody, thanks for taking the time to have us in today. We view this as an update, and it's hopefully a good news update as to what we're doing. So I'm going to run through some slides as a preamble to a demo that we'd like to show you. It'll last about 6 minutes. And then after the demo, we'll turn it over to Tom, and President Snyder will talk about Ivy Tech's involvement in the program and where this fits in with other programs that they're running. So quite simply, I'm missing a chart. Connexus Indiana is a not-for-profit, works under the umbrella of Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. Back in 2007, Connexus was founded basically to meet the needs of the advanced manufacturing and logistics cluster or sector. So that began our work. So we're part of CICP. We work in the advanced manufacturing and logistics sector. We went around the state and we talked to a number of companies. I think it was over 75 companies asking for their requirements and their requests. Was it economic development? Were there things we could do for them on policy or lobbying? And it came back overwhelmingly that they really wanted to see workforce development as the #1 go-get for Connexus Indiana. And that became, for us, the obvious demand signal. There's over 11,000 jobs that come available every year in advanced manufacturing and logistics in the state. There's a massive baby boomer retirement surge coming. It's been delayed by the economy, but it is coming. We're starting to see it. Some of the interesting data we've seen is that companies who used to have an average workforce age of about 47 is now climbing up to 52 and 53. So they know that when the recession really starts to subside and we start to really pick up, that they're going to have huge problems trying to fill up their skilled workforce. We talked to them about a skills template, and it really took 2 years talking to all of these different companies to say, what is it you want to see being taught at the K-12 level? And they came back, and I'll show it to you on one of my last slides, but the skills template really identified skill sets necessary to succeed in the workplace. We then aligned that with the Department of Education pathways. And then, interestingly enough, we went out to industry and said, this is a new program, this is a different way of skinning the animal. We want to fund this with private dollars. So the funders for the program became Lilly Endowment, Lumina, and the Manufacturing Institute. Lilly Endowment, probably 50% of the money that went into it. But over $450,000 came out of private sector, and you see the companies that are represented, and they are around the state. We selected some of the major players, if you will. But this entire curriculum from our position became funded through private dollars. And then obviously working in conjunction with Tom at Ivy Tech and with others, we were able to put together what we think is a dynamic curriculum. We then said we need an infrastructure. If you have a curriculum, that's great, but if you have no place to teach it, it's not going to work very well. A big part of that is we have 109 schools who have signed on, with or without the curriculum, by the way, to do advanced manufacturing and logistics awareness events and training. We then reached out to companies. There are 65 companies who are actually tied to an individual high school. They're called A-plus partners. So, for example, an Ellison Transmission tied to Speedway High School here in Indianapolis, that type of thing, where they work back and forth on programs. And then we started what's called the Pledge, and we have almost 100 pledge companies around the state. And this is an example of the pledge that actually hangs in their lobby, but that's, something that hangs on a wall doesn't do us any good. We actually have people who follow up with each company to help them do the following things. And you see it as a A-plus partner to a high school, creating intern positions for high school students, co-op relationships for college students, and you can go down through. Interestingly, on the bottom right, sponsor robotic STEMS programs. We also really campaign for Project Lead the Way and other programs that are out there. So this is not a competitive environment, it's about options. We see Project Lead the Way at more of a higher level, almost a pre-engineering level, where a lot of the program candidates that we have in the higher technology curriculum are going to be in the associate degree and credential level. So it's offering options as we go. Quite simply, and I want to get through this so we can get to the demo, but there are 9 schools this year who are actually doing the pilot. There's supposed to be a map up there that didn't transition very well, but we scattered them around the state. So there are 2 in Northeast Indiana, 1 in Northwest Indiana. There are Batesville. There are 2 in Evansville. There's 1 in Terre Haute. There are 2 in Indianapolis. So they're scattered about. We did the training in a boot camp style. We wanted to get 20 students per school. Started off with 8 schools, so the target was 160. We wound up going to 37 students per school being offered, with multiple classes being offered. So we far exceeded expectation on the demand signal. Next year, we think we'll have 40 schools. That's a very conservative figure. We're already about at that point now. We've got 20 new schools who have signed on, plus the 9 pilots, and there's probably another 45 schools that we're talking to. So by 2014-15, when it's offered statewide, I think you're going to be looking at 1,500 to 2,000 students in the pipeline coming through, and that will be an annual number of students who will be coming out of the program. It's 2 years, and here's what it looks like. Your industry anchors, I talked about what industry wanted to see. Those are the 6 bullets under the anchors. Six Sigma, regulatory compliance, total quality management, to name a few. We've made sure we've incorporated and worked with the Department of Education on state standards. Ivy Tech's MPro program is a baseline, along with APICS, which has a credentialing program for operations and for logistics. They're out of Chicago. They're probably the most accepted and well-known industry credential out there in logistics and in operations. So those are the contents, drivers of the curriculum. When you come through the 2-year program, you wind up with between 9 and 15 dual credit hours. Tom will speak to that. And also certificates, 3 out of MSSC and 2 out of APICS. So a graduating student from Indiana high school can come out with up to 15 credit hours, 5 industry credentials, and we've gone back to industry and say, will you recognize this? Will you give this preferential treatment in your hiring practices? And obviously they will. This is something that they've not seen before. Okay, as quickly as I can, we're going to run a demo and then we'll turn it over to Tom. Do we know how to run the demo?
Just click
Click
one
again?
more time. Yeah, should.
Do we know how to run the demo? Here we go. I think we got it.
Yeah. There we go.
There we go. Thanks. Should be sound.
Was the sound already up? Okay.
Connexus Indiana, along with our corporate funders and development partners, including Ivy Tech Community College, is leading the charge to create Higher Technology, an industry-driven advanced manufacturing and logistics curriculum, preparing high school students for great jobs in Indiana's largest sector. A high school diploma or GED doesn't cut it these days. Indiana manufacturers and logistics companies are demanding more. More skills, more understanding, more accountability, more credentials. Higher Technology is designed to meet these demands, including those of today's value-added logistics industry. Students who successfully complete the 2-year Higher Technology course sequence will be armed to compete. They'll learn skills and knowledge determined by Hoosier Industry, earn up to 15 dual credits, and get 5 industry credentials. Ivy Tech dual credits and much of the MSSC credential content is delivered through animated slides and narration. In this example, students learn about the Cartesian coordinate system, X, Y, and Z axis, and how it relates to the computer numerical controllers, CNCs, which are commonly used in manufacturing.
The Cartesian coordinate system allows the CNC control to translate the directions in a program into the movements of the machine components. By connecting multiple points along a plane and in space along the Cartesian coordinate system, the machine can connect straight or curved lines precisely to create the part.
An online simulator allows students to practice skills as if they were in a traditional lab setting. To learn about basic electrical circuits, for example, students select and connect components to build and operate an electrical circuit with a buzzer. To provide further student engagement and to bridge students from high school to college level and certificate-based content, Connexus created a virtual training lab which features a 3D manufacturing and logistics environment, online games, quick activities, apps, and a resource library. In this example, the user identifies safety hazards by clicking on them, such as this drum of hazardous materials that fails to comply with company and industry guidelines. The training lab is also used to deliver APICS certificate content. APICS is one of the most highly respected logistics and operations credentialing organizations, and for the first time ever, they're offering a middle skill credential suitable for high school students. In this example, students learn about the team members in a logistics facility.
In production control, we watch over the scheduling of the manufacturing process from start to finish. As we get ready to launch our new helmet, it's up to me to develop the master production schedule, making sure everything we need is ready to go so our helmets hit the markets on time.
The resource library is just that. It houses resources students might need to learn more about advanced manufacturing and logistics topics and skills. Students can find things like case studies, images, and reference materials here. Offline projects provide students with variety while reinforcing soft skills, such as team building and communication skills. To that end, each semester features a semester-long hands-on team project. These projects enable students to demonstrate what they've learned in fun, creative ways. At Connexus's teacher training, higher technology educators complete the student projects. They team up to brainstorm, design, and present their projects to the class. Higher technology knowledge checks and short assessments are built into the online environments and provide students with a low-risk way of determining if they have mastered content. Testing is also completed online. The Higher Technology program is currently being piloted in 8 Indiana high schools and career centers. The program will become more widely available in 2013 and 2014, with statewide availability in 2014. Here's what pilot teachers are saying.
I like that the curriculum is based for Indiana, for our manufacturing industry, that there's consultation with industry in Indiana, and that's very nice when I can go back to my classroom and I can say, you need to know this because this directly affects your future employment the next 2 to 4 years.
It gives you a lot of guidelines in a broad way if you don't have the tools or the facilities that you can do it online, or you can, if you do have facilities, you can incorporate your own type of teaching environment.
I like Higher Technology because it's student-based. They can work on it at home. They can work on it additional time at school. They have an enrichment period that are able to work on it then. They don't have to have a teacher around all of the time. If they have questions, the teacher's always available, but they have the opportunity to take their own time and at their own pace and finish it as they can.
It's blended in the fact that it's driven by lecture, driven by e-learning, driven by project-based learning, so it meets the needs of a diverse student population. So that's some of the benefits to me of Higher Technology.
Hoosier students who complete this one-of-a-kind program will be prepared to continue their AML education at a 2 or 4-year college or university, or can use the credentials they've earned to enter the workforce sooner. Either way, it's critical that our high school graduates have more to offer than just a diploma. Indiana's largest industry depends on our ability to educate and train a generation of students. It's that simple. With a pipeline of qualified employees at the ready, Hoosier companies can better prepare for the rising tide of retirements while incorporating the non-stop advances in manufacturing and logistics technology and processes into their facilities. Higher Technology, Connexus's and Ivy Tech's turnkey solution to meeting Indiana's need for a highly skilled, high-performing AML workforce.
Before I turn it over to Tom, I'll just make a couple of closing comments from my perspective. That is, Claudia Cummings is in the room with me, works for us. Obviously, I'm sitting here doing the talking. She's doing all the work with her team, and they've been phenomenal. So I'd really like to recognize Claudia in that effort. They're putting together 31 projects. So as you see the curriculum, which is online, it can at times be dry. So 31 projects now takes you into a team environment where you actually take, like the Cartesian coordinates, and you actually start doing plotting and working. So you actually get to see it up close and personal. So it makes it a little more exciting for the student. And then finally, Tom is here from Ivy Tech, and obviously Ivy Tech is our partner in this. We're also working with Vincennes to make sure that their programs can butt up to the high school offerings, and they can have dual credit offerings also. So we are trying to make it as accessible to everybody as possible. But as I turn over to Tom, they've been a phenomenal partner, and I thank you for that.
Steve and I have been working together for a long time. It turns out that he was at Rolls-Royce running that when I was at Delco Remy, so we're kindred souls in the need for people that understand manufacturing. He mentioned middle skills jobs, and really that's the crunch. As you go around and talk to businesses in Indiana, advanced manufacturing is maybe the tip of the iceberg because these folks that are all friends of ours, they've been so vocal. There aren't enough high-skilled people, and what Connexus is doing is really leading edge around the country. And let me point out a little bit through my presentation why this is so critical to Indiana. When they talk about college, they're really talking about just what Connexus is doing. These credentials are really post-secondary credentials, and the extent you can deliver those in high school, it really does mean you can leave high school job ready. If you don't have something like a nationally recognized credential or a tipping point of more than 12 credit hours, you're probably going to be stuck in a non-middle class job. This is Indiana's position today. We're at 33%. I'll show you where we rank in the country. We're certainly behind the rest of the U.S., and of course we're behind high-performing countries like Korea and like Canada. And so these kind of programs that Connexus is taking the lead on are really instrumental, because we're not going to send everybody to a 4-year school. One is demand and 2 is cost. So this is the point that we're trying to make, and that is college attainment is really the way out of the middle class. And what Connexus is doing is not only filling a talent gap, but is actually, and here I'll make these so they don't all come up at once. This is where we rank, and here we are. So we're 40th out of 50 states in college attainment. And you can look up here, and I think you get this electronically, so you can carry this back and look at this. But if you exclude Nevada, which is a gaming state, and you exclude Oklahoma, which is a oil state, the states tend to be stuck in the bottom are ones that have, a combination of both low attainment and low median income. And this is why it gets to be a problem. And this is one of the reasons I'm speaking tomorrow at the statewide counselors meeting, to explain to them a little bit of this. We sponsor this luncheon every year, and that is, we too often are telling people that something less than a 4-year degree is not the right thing to do, and actually we're setting up for displaced expectations. The issue that Tony Carnevale points out, and he's been a very formidable economist in this area, if you leave high school with just a high school credential, you are perhaps consigned to the middle class. He just ran a survey that over the last 20 years, high school only without some college credential have continued to lose jobs. And in this recession, since January 2010, high school only have continued to lose jobs, which is one of the reasons this 8% number has been so hard to move. And of course then, what we've been saying, and I've been trying to preach to our people, and that is the traditional college experience may be out of reach for half the Hoosier families, and here's why. Okay, this is the average sticker price for the 3 largest residential campuses for this fall. Doesn't include fees, and as I say, maybe I won't say here for the record because we're public, but anyway, doesn't include books or some of the other things college students might go out and buy. So this is, so how does this translate? Well, when you go to the next step and you say, what's the median? Here, let me go one too far. Okay, so the median family income is $46,000. Now, I've assumed those people are eligible for Pell. Pell is a national grant for low-income families. It really kicks in between 40 and 42, but for purposes of here, I've just pointed out to us that our median family income before taxes is $46,000. So what it says, Pell, max Pell is $22,000 for 4 years, that a low-income family would have to borrow or save this amount of money, which is over $50,000. So what's the flip side of that? This is really what Steve's addressing. Steve's addressing this curve, and I think it's one that Carnevale has put out that says that you can actually have a good, strong middle class opportunity and actually grow from there without a 4-year degree. And if you read from the left to the right, it says that 43% of the people with a certificate or a credential can out earn an associate's degree. 27% can out earn a bachelor's degree. And then it says also, which we've said, a third of the associate's degree can out earn a bachelor's degree. What we've said here in Indiana, that is, and this is older data, it's about 3 years old, that in 38 of the 92 counties, associate's degree today do out earn bachelor's degree. Mostly driven by the fact that a 2.5, 3-year degree in nursing is one of the highest paid professions in the country. So where does that leave it? Well, that's why we think this is important. So the partnership here is they get a post-secondary credential. A lot of people have said, are we getting enough steam out of those 4 years in high school? And we tend to believe that, and of course Connexus has proven that. They get a nationally recognized certificate. They get college in high school, no college costs. They do have a $30 per semester fee, but that's pretty nominal. They can take up to 1 to 4 semesters of dual credit, and it doesn't prevent them from taking math dual credit, English dual credit, or other dual credit. These have actually, I'm not sure that Steve pointed this out, you may want to comment, these are actually more popular in a new tech high than they are in a traditional career and technical region. That those people realize the value of this. So we think that this is not going to be consigned to the traditional CTE. This is going to be important. And of course, we have to have students that don't need math remediation. So that's one of the other issues is we're working with Department of Education on that. I thought I would wrap this up with a couple comments on math remediation. Let me advance just one more. Chris, if you can do that. Sure. Okay, this is the number, and I'll circulate these around. This is the number of people that are currently in dual credit today in Indiana. So with the other colleges, dual credit is getting to be a critical role of reducing the cost of a 2 or 4 year degree, because we are now having an occasional graduate complete 2 years of college and get their college diploma for 2 years at the same time they get their high school diploma, which we think is pretty amazing. So that brochure is what's been sent to all high schools. We are currently doing dual credit in 332 high schools. So let me just close with a couple words on math, because reading does have to be solved in elementary school, because you can't really remediate English in college level. If they come not prepared for reading, they're not prepared. But math gets to be more of a big stumbling block. This is math as we see it today. Math today is designed as if everybody was going to be what we became, which are engineers. It's that traditional approach. I don't think that's actually going to change, but it's a STEM pathway where you do algebra, trig, you use STEM-based assessments and SAT. There is still a distinction between high school and college math, and it is difficult to do much work in a traditional high school beyond calculus, and this is what we've discussed with the high school plan. And then college math, for example, we remediate as if everybody is going to Bloomington. So when we have people who can't do college math at Ivy Tech, it's because about 15 years ago, we eliminated math for alternative careers. Now we're restudying that, as we can say. So this is what we're doing today. It's matched to the 4-year curriculum. It's STEM-based. We give a placement test. There is no link today between the Core 40 or K-12 work. Remediation, about 65% of all students need remediation, about 30% of high school students need remediation, and only about half of them are able to complete the work. So let me go back one. Okay, this is what we're trying to do to link it, and this is important to, and this has been discussed with the Education Roundtable, and that is that math is still linked to the STEM pathway, but we would have common placement scores, PSAT, ACT, that we are switching over to a test called AccuPlacer, which has better diagnostics for everybody in the school, and that we would start to concentrate on the remediation that's going on in the high school today, and we would study the math requirements together. Let me come back to this. So this is what we think, this is my closing slide, is a possible college-ready remediation strategy that's in the formative stages. All students would attempt Algebra 1, and today it's an important step. All students take the PSAT, which we think is very important. What we would do is the high schools would look at students who had trouble with Algebra 1 or had trouble on their AccuPlacer test and make that assessment as juniors. And if they are in need of remediation, that K-12, really through the Department of Education, and they're now in the formative stages, would develop a new math alternative that would give them math as a senior, which would be either, if they're ready enough to do, and their career pathway, Algebra 2 with calculus, as if they're going into STEM, or with this new thinking of quantitative reasoning. And so we think that 2,000 students in the Connexus program is not optimistic. It actually probably is under what the market's going to demand in the future, particularly if they can spread it into these other career fields that you're working on. And we think if we can in line start to get people to think by the time they're juniors what their math readiness is, we can get more students who may not want to pursue a 4-year degree to be prepared for this. So my summary is that the work that Claudia has done is groundbreaking in the country. I think this is a story that Dr. Bennett can take around to other states, and we're excited to be their partner.
Questions? This is great. What companies in Northwest Indiana are participating?
Northwest.
Northwest Indiana has a pilot at Clark High School in Hammond, and the company that they are paired with is, you know what? Off the top of my head, I'm supposed to know it, and I don't. Lear Corporation.
Oh, Lear.
Lear Corporation.
Lear.
Lear.
Are there still companies going to come on board? Or?
I'm sorry?
Are there still companies going to come on board?
Yeah, actually we're starting to work, some new work in the Elkhart area, and they're doing some work with Linda Olshansky over in the region. And steel companies, which I think are coming on board, they just aren't there yet, have already been talked to.
Both ArcelorMittal and U.S. Steel are trying to create a program called Steelwork of the Future, and Claudia's been talking to them about that. And they are very interested in one of the things that is an issue, and that is they want to have people come prepared when they walk in the door to be a qualified mechatronics person in electrical or mechanics. That takes a lot more equipment than a typical CTE or even a typical Ivy Tech would have. So I think one of the barriers to doing that kind of program is more investment in the CTE or more investment in the Ivy Tech location, and then everybody can use that equipment. But they clearly want to have that student come prepared to them from the high school.
Thank you. Kind of related to my question, which is there any part of this curriculum that's actually in a facility?
In a facility?